Jen, we should have recorded when we were together.
I didn't bring a microphone.
No, me neither.
It's not fit in my carry-on.
But it's nice because I left you yesterday, and now
Here we are again.
We are back on our bullshit.
Doing the business. It was really nice. I don't know if you've all had the chance to just go somewhere with your friend for a couple of days, but I just feel like I really needed to just talk about a bunch of different crazy stuff for 3 days straight, and that's what we did.
It was really nice. It was the first time I think I've been able to do that.
Yeah.
In fact, it is the first time I've done that.
Yeah, it was delightful.
Since, the beginning of all of this just general hellscaping.
Speaking of hell.
Oh, nice. Nice segue. Look at that. Well done.
Well, why don't you explain this Instagram thing? Because everyone knows I don't understand Instagram. So Sarah's going to have to explain how we got here.
Jen has Instagram bias.
I think Instagram's smarter than I am. I don't understand it.
Instagram has Jen bias.
There you go, bam.
Wait, but first of all, welcome everyone to Fated Mates. I'm Sarah McLean. I read romance novels and I write them.
And I'm Jennifer Prokop, a romance reader and editor.
And this week on Fated Mates, we have turned to Instagram, which it wasn't intentional, but we did it for some reason. No, not for some reason. So as you all know, for the last couple of interstitial episodes, we've really been digging deep and finding all of the buttons that we could find. And I think we've done a good job. I think we've turned out some really fun interstitials. And you all on Instagram seem to feel the same way because you started just throwing interstitial ideas at us on Instagram, which was pretty great. And so anytime any of you have thrown an interstitial idea at me on Instagram, I have put the request into stories along with an Instagram poll and let the Fated Mates...
Let the people decide.
Exactly. So you have had an opportunity to say yes or no to several tropes. And I will tell you that it seems like you guys are just easy to please because they've all been resoundingly yes tropes. But the one that we're going to do today in true Fated Mates style, because it's been a long time, we're going to do vampires.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. I'm for it.
Listen, we did Cressley for a long time. And then we did a deep dive for Dark Lover.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which is a J.R. Ward, the first in the J.R. Ward Black Dagger Brotherhood series. We'll put links to all of this in show notes. But we really have not even scratched the surface, ironically.
The paranormal surface is...
I feel like we just overdosed on it in season 1.
Yeah, I think so. I also think... I think about a lot about an interstitial we did at the beginning of the season with Jenny Norringback about monsters and about her sort of argument that monster romance is essentially what paranormal used to be, right? Because it's hard. I feel like paranormal, the kind of paranormal that we saw rise up in a huge wave after 9/11 and after Twilight, and those days are gone. And so it's really interesting to sort of see how that subgenre has changed.
Can I tell you a story, though?
Yeah, for sure.
So today, you all know that we moved. We've moved not just house, but we've also moved neighborhoods. And in New York City, that means basically
you live in a new country,
across the country, right? And so we've been taking walks on the weekends, trying to just explore what's around.
Yeah.
And today we found the bookstore.
Yes.
And it's called The Bookmark Shop, SHOPPE.
Love it.
And it's a great little indie, filled to the brim, chock block. It's not big. It's a New York City storefront, and it's just wall to wall, floor to ceiling, just books everywhere. And I went in, nervous.
Sure.
It's not going to have a romance section. And it does have a romance section.
Amazing.
And it has a very fascinating romance section because it's definitely not what's new, and it's definitely not what's popular these days. It was every Bridgerton book.
Yeah.
And about 40 different paranormal authors.
Interesting.
And one Harlequin, like one category. And I was like,
is this new or used?
Yeah. And I was like, are these used? Like I had the same thought you did. No, all new.
Fascinating.
And I was like, somebody is a paranormal reader.
Yes.
In this, because
otherwise it doesn't make sense, right?
It was such a bizarre romance section for 2022. And of course I knew we were coming back. I was coming back to record this. And so I was looking at all the names like, oh my God, like Larissa Ione is in here.
Yes.
When's the last time you saw one of those on a shelf?
Never,
like,
right. So
was really, really cool. Christine Fian, like people who, but interestingly, no Cressley, no J.R. Ward. Like it was just, it was not obscure, but like.
Yeah. Like a time capsule.
Yeah. I said to Eric, I was like, it was clearly curated.
Right.
This section. It was just curated by somebody who has a very specific taste.
Yeah.
And also knows Bridgerton is popular right now.
Fair.
So I'm going to go back in on a weekday and introduce myself to the owners of the Bookmark Shop in Brooklyn, in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. And, but I was really, really fascinated because here's what I believe about paranormal readers. I believe that they did not disappear. I believe that they continue to be voracious.
Yes.
Readers, and they are finding their books in like really different locations because traditional romance publishers have forsaken them, much like the Lord hath forsaken the vampire.
I mean, look, the Black Dagger Brotherhood just published its 20th book and has several spin-off series.
Mm-hmm.
It is not the case that there are no vampire books out there, right? But it certainly is not like it was, 15 years ago, I guess, where you couldn't,
throw a stone
without hitting, Lothair or whatever. So, I mean, I think it's interesting to think about because I think you're right. I think if you love those books and I was thinking a lot about like vampires in particular. And, we talked about this with season 1, but like, how is a vampire? What's the appeal of a vampire? And how is it different than the appeal of, say, a werewolf or some other kind of paranormal creature, right? And I think the thing to me about vampires that's always been really appealing is the like ennui.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's what's sexy about it.
Yes.
The itch that has to be scratched is
I'm so tired of my immortal life.
I haven't seen anything new or different or interesting in 1,000 years.
Until you.
And
that is fucking hot.
It really, really is.
Right? And I think that, and it's funny because
it's the ultimate bad boy, right?
Yeah.
Like the bad boy who smoked cigarettes behind your high school cafeteria.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. Whereas I think werewolves sometimes are more like the jock, right? Like they're so physical and they're so right. And so I was thinking about it in terms of like what it is that you get when you're reading one of those books and why they're so appealing. And then, I also really. Well, I'm going to tell you how I kind of tackled this task because I realized I was like, a lot of my favorite vampire books are books every listener has already read, right? Because, well, maybe not because we have new listeners, but like, right? So, I mean, it's worth us like sort of talking about some of those classic series.
Because if you came to romance post-Cressley, right? Like, if you came to romance in the last 15 years, you probably haven't spent a lot of time with paranormal. Or had access to it, unless you live near me.
Right. I mean, and that's the part that's sort of interesting is, I would say, though, so, like, let's put a huge, like, content warning on all future books that we're going to talk about. Because
we have to, because I have not reread most of these, and I'm sure we are
Right. So I'm sure
Yes.
that there's especially dated language. We've talked a lot about how paranormal kind of traffics in some gendered ways, right? About kind of roles, so
Male, female.
right, all that stuff.
These are very
right?
binary language in most of these books.
And I also think that they are, they deal with, blood and violence and life and death in a way that most kind of contemporaries or whatever don't. So I think that there's also different levels of even just like that kind of stuff that people have to watch out for. So, moving forward, anything we talk about, just please check wherever you check for content warnings, because I haven't reread all of them either. And I think it's just worth us saying that.
I want to talk about this TikTok.
Yes, I want to do that too before we start. So
we have talked about, Jen and I have talked about on this podcast many, many times about like the movements of romance, the rise of paranormal, the rise of the billionaire, the rise of
daddy,
whatever. Yeah, what daddy romance really is doing, like what it means in the world, why it exists. And you all have heard us speak ad nauseum about how we believe that paranormal romance was born after, or had its heyday after 9/11, because it felt like you needed this kind of like giant paranormal figure, this person who literally was literally required to save the world and literally could not die while doing it, kind of thing. It reflected a lot of the way that, a lot of cultural fear in the United States post 9/11. We talked about the billionaire being, post the recession of 2008, this kind of rise of, somebody in the world coming to save you.
Right.
The first, interestingly, like the paranormal wave was coming to save you physically from harm. And the second, the wave was coming to save you from essentially poverty, right? Like coming to save you from, the recession and what it was doing. And Jen and I have been talking a lot about like, what does the pandemic do to books? What does it do to romance? And I don't think I'm putting words in your mouth when I say like, we're not sure yet.
Right.
We have ideas. We're not sure yet.
Right.
But there is a TikTok, and we will link to her in show notes because she's amazing. Her TikTok name is Virgo Like Beyonce. And her name is Megan. And yesterday, she posted about, she's a cultural, she's like a cultural analyst.
Right.
And she posted about the fact that, 9/11 gave the theory is that 9/11 gave the culture, like us as a society, superhero movies.
Right.
Which I've never thought about it from a film perspective, but that makes sense, right? Like paranormal.
Oh, this is very common. There's many an article about the rise of the superhero movie after 9/11. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the recession gave us zombies, and what's next? And her point is that when we talk about superheroes and when we talk about the rise of zombies post-recession, we're actually talking about like forgiving the worst of us.
Yeah. It was fascinating.
I'm going to let you talk more because I know that you have a theory, and I'm going to let you decide if you're going to tell everybody it.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I think I more or less said it, so I feel comfortable saying that. But like, I've been thinking a lot about dark romance and the appeal. And one of the things that I feel that we've talked about a lot on the back channeling is that these are stories where you can forgive a really terrible person. He's, again, in a male-female setting, right? He's a murderer, he's a rapist, he's drug trafficking, whatever, because he's good to you, right? And it feels a whole lot like an entire society worth of readers, of women in particular, are looking...
And largely white women.
White women, yeah, absolutely. Are looking to essentially forgive themselves for, staying married to their Trumper husbands, I guess, or, the people that are taking away, banning books all over the country, or right? Like, how do you...
Or women's rights.
Yeah, right. What, how do we as individuals try and assuage our own feelings of well, as long as he's good to me.
Right. The complexity of...
Right. I don't have to worry about...
they're nice people, so...
Right. Right. And this is, look, this is painful. This is painful, I think, for many people. And so it's kind of like working through at like a very meta level what's forgivable and what's not.
Mm-hmm. And so what this woman, Megan, is talking about is she's sort of saying, okay, superheroes were on the rise after 9/11 because they gave us it wasn't a superhero, she's arguing. She's arguing it was an anti-hero, which it fully tracks to paranormal, by the way.
Absolutely.
Because it was like this sort of sense of like what we had to reckon with of our own, like we were at war. We were at war with, except we were at war with this like mysterious force, right? Like we were doing as a country, and of course this is a very American-centric, conversation, sure. But like America was doing terrible things to people who had no agency in what had happened to us, right? So there, it wasn't quite the same as like, for example, what's happening in Ukraine and, Russia, where like, there's an enemy that is a state, right? In that case. And then post-recession, zombies were about leaving people behind. Right? Like you were justified. We had to reckon with leaving the weak behind.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she talks about, and I was so vindicated because my theory about what pandemic romance is going to give us is that it's actually giving us more working class heroes and blue collar heroes, particularly. I mean, heroines too, but like, I'm particularly interested in what the hero is. And because in the way that I think about romance, often I think that like when romance does a social thing, it's often doing it using the hero.
Yeah,
like,
I agree.
As the model.
Yeah. The thing that patriarchy is grappling with, right? Like whatever that is.
The rule, like hegemony.
Right. Fancy.
So I think what's interesting here is that I have really thought that we're something about class is happening in romance right now. Like we're seeing billionaires less and less, and other kinds of heroes who are still wealthy. Let's be clear, like there's it's. Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
But we're seeing fewer and fewer billionaires and more heroes who are just like decent people who are doing what one might call a normal job. Right. And what Megan says is that she believes that the thing that we are going to have to grapple with and like deal with in the wake of the pandemic is work.
Yeah.
And so what she's asking, like, what will film look like, or television look like? What is the theme that will make us forgive ourselves for what work is, for capitalism?
Yeah, right, essentially.
And I think that that's what we're possibly doing too.
Yeah. So I think the cinnamon roll conversation is largely similar in some ways, right? Like a regular person who works a regular job or works with the main characters work together in a regular way, and not boss assistant, but like equals. And I think, I think a lot of this is really rooted in, kind of like, who are we right now? Right?
Yeah. You think about Tessa Bailey just hit,
number one
on USA Today and New York Times list with hook, line, and sinker.
Yes, he's a fisherman, and she's the one who has money, of course, but she still has kind of a regular job on set. She doesn't want to live off the money that she has from her family. So and then everyone in that town is, a regular person doing regular job, doing regular work.
And this is not to say, I just want to be clear before you tweet us. We're not saying small town romance didn't exist before. Of course it did.
Sure.
But I think that what we're starting to see is more and more of us, including me. I look at my books, right? And I think I'm just more interested these days in heroes who are not billionaires.
Well, it's always been hard to valorize billionaires. But
I did not have that problem for a long time.
Yeah, I guess I would say it was easy to valorize comfort and the idea that you could, have what you needed and not have to worry. That is very deeply comforting. But billionaires as right? Now we're seeing sort of a true love is the answer, right? You don't need the creature comforts as long as you can be with each other.
This episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Kelly Cain, author of An Acquired Taste.
You love this, Sarah?
I love it. I'm such trash for a chef book. I really am. And this one features not one, but two chefs. The heroine, Rowan, is this like thoughtful farm-to-table chef who is working in her mother's restaurant and just trying to like get attention for the food that she cares about. And the hero, Knox Everhart.
Great romance name.
He's like restaurant royalty, and the two of them have hated each other since culinary school. And they are, of course, thrust together on a Top Chef style cooking show.
I love how hard this book leans into the chef stuff. Every single one of these chapters starts with a recipe. And sometimes it's a real recipe, but the one that opens the book is a recipe for an asshat boy. 2 cups arrogance, 1 cup intensity, a dash of petty.
It's really great. So you can read An Acquired Taste in print and and audio. And you can find more information about Kelly at kellycainauthor.com. That's KELLYCAIN author.com. Or as always, you can find information on the book, on Kelly, and links to all of her social media stuff in show notes.
Thanks to Kelly Cain for sponsoring this week's episode of Fated Mates.
But most vampires, interestingly, are not billionaires, despite having lived for a long time. Most of them are just millionaires, just plain old millionaires.
Well,
just ordinary millionaires.
Yeah, money means nothing to them, right? Like they're beyond the human concern, those needs for.
Well, they always have nice houses.
They have nice houses and stuff,
but the mortgage is paid. It's
been paid. Listen, it's been paid forever. So it's worth noting that like there are several big like series that if you really just want vampire series, right?
I think we should start there. Like who are just name checking some people, because obviously in our world there's Cressley,
sure,
and there's J.R. Ward, both of whom we've done episodes on,
right?
But I think I really think that you can't talk about vampires in romance without talking about Christine Fian.
Sure.
She is somebody who 1000% I recommend making sure that you look at content warnings for.
Yes.
Because these books are a lot, even now. Especially now, maybe. And that series begins, her sort of most famous, I think, vampire series begins with Dark Prince. Mm-hmm. And that is, the heroine is like it was clearly born out of the rise of romantic suspense. The like huge popularity of romantic suspense in the 90s delivered us Fian's kind of wild idea, which was, what if I wrote a heroine who is like, she's like a profiler, a professional profiler for like sociopaths and serial killers. And she has just finished this like truly traumatic case for herself. She's helped find a serial killer, and I think she's like a telepath or something. Like she has like a
lot of that wouldn't surprise me. And I feel like I've read this, but it's been a while since I have. But many Christine Fian books are interested in people that
psychic.
Have psychic powers. Yeah.
So she's, tracked down the serial killer. Lots and lots of people are fascinated by her now. She's like, I don't know, like a lady mentalist.
Sure.
And so she goes on vacation, like home to the Carpathian Mountains.
Yes.
Where, and obviously you know what happens in the Carpathian Mountains. There's just vampires fucking everywhere.
Fucking everywhere. You're welcome, everybody.
So I'm going to cut to the cover copy for this because it's just too good and I couldn't do it justice. So she meets Prince Mikhail Dubrinsky, who is the leader of the Carpathian race.
Yes.
That is currently growing closer and closer to extinction because, obviously. And he is close to giving in to the heavy weight of loneliness and despair.
Oh, yeah. Poor guy. Right.
But
ennui.
There it is, Jen. And it is talk about a heavyweight. Like, yes. It is Fian, nobody does this like Christine Fian. Like, it is dripping with it on the page.
Yes.
And then, but they're psychics together, and they feel each other, fated mates style. So we go back to the fated mates concept, this kind of idea that even over thousands and thousands, millennia, right?
Yeah.
You at some point will find the one.
Right.
Like this one true mate who is the one to rule them all, right?
Right.
And so heads up on this. Apparently, when I looked this up today, there is an author's cut edition.
Probably 1,000 pages long.
100 additional pages. I don't know that you need that.
Nope. Yeah, probably not.
I mean, unless you're a Fian fan,
Sure.
in which case, hello, congratulations, you just found 100 more pages of your favorite book.
Yeah. Well, and that series, I believe, is also still ongoing, right?
Yeah, I think it's still. Let me look it up.
I mean,
I think so.
I feel like I looked at this and there's 25 or 30 different books in this series. So, these are like long running series.
There are 32 so far.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the last one was published last year. No, is coming.
Is
this
coming.
Year.
Yeah. Sure.
Wow. So there you go.
Right. So some other like long running series, I don't really want to talk at length about them, but it's like kind of worth saying if you're like, yeah, I might want to dive into that, because there is, I will say, also a certain comfort in, I'm just going to hit this series and keep going, right? The Black Dagger Brotherhood series by J.R. Ward. I really, back in the day, really loved, there's a lot of contemporary kind of fantasy. We would have called it urban fantasy, I guess. But like the True Blood series by the Sookie Stackhouse books are great.
Those are really fun.
Now they're not really
super
romances.
sexy.
They're not super sexy, but they're really, really terrific.
So fun.
And I would say the Kate Daniels series by Alona Andrews, the two like love interests are not vampires, but there's vampires in the world.
Yep.
And that is also a great series. So, and that one terminates at 10. That's a very doable 10. Right? But you said Larissa Ione is at the Demonica series?
Yep, I think that's the one. Yeah,
a lot of
sure
those.
you did. Of course you did. And then, wait a second, because did you read Lara Adrian?
No.
Lara Adrian did a, what's it called? Midnight Breed, maybe, is the name of it.
Interesting.
I'm looking at it. I think, yes. Vampires Going Rogue.
There you go.
So, and what was happening at the time that all these books were coming out, and I remember this really vividly, was it was all like vampire lore, and every single one of these people, each of these writers was putting a really like different spin on it. Like, these vampires, the lore all had different rules, which was really fascinating. Like those Sookie Stackhouse books, like everyone knew vampires existed in those. And I think that every one of these series felt like, okay, this is really, really cool. Like,
yeah,
a different way of thinking about this, like very old and very sort of dyed in the wool kind of concept, like, but gone were the days of Dracula.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's also, and again, like anybody who's been following romance news over the last decade knows that Sherilyn Kenyon has certainly had a lot of, there's been a lot of like kerfuffle around her, but, her series, what was that called? The Dark Hunters? Kind of another one that was right around that same time and really game changing.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that is, if you've been around for a minute with your Kindle, the other thing that is really wild to me is that indie published books sometimes are no longer available, right? The author has removed them from Amazon. So there was like a series I really liked called, it was like the Faustian Brothers. And the author's name was Evie Byrne. And I was like, oh, God, I haven't read those since 2009. But I remember really liking that series. But, like, it's no longer available. It's just can't get it anymore. And I really find myself thinking a lot about Like, I mean, I guess that's it. Like, books go out of print, even ebooks.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
I want to recommend a book that is also like part of a long-running series that is also still going that I really like by Nalini Singh, and that is the Guild Hunter series. So in the first book in that series, which came out in 2009, which is called Angel's Blood, and I was really drawn today to try to like be like, okay, I want to talk about some books that had like maybe like an interesting or different take on the vampire, like kind of that was like my take. I was like finding like sort of the traditional vampire would be pretty easy. In Angel's Blood in this series, in the Guild Hunter series, the first 3 books are about Elena and Raphael, and she is a vampire hunter and he is an archangel. And in this series, archangels essentially make vampires out of humans who essentially agree to serve the archangels in return for immortal life. And so in this series, Elena does vampire hunting. She's something like a born vampire hunter. It's not something she like learned as a trade. She has like this innate ability to like just smell vampires. And if you can do that, you're like, right. And, it's a really propulsive opening because she essentially comes off a job. She's caught this vampire who tried to run away from the angel who made him. And then she gets essentially told that she has another job by her guild and shows up the next morning. And it is with like the most terrifying archangel there is, Raphael. And he wants her, it's like this really dramatic scene where they're having like lunch on the top of the building, but like the building has no guardrails, right? Like it's all sexy danger the entire time. And we've talked about Nalini Singh before. Like it would be a shame to not talk about a Nalini Singh series. Like she is another person who I think has really figured out a way to keep writing paranormal and stay really relevant. So if you're interested, the Guild Hunter series is great. And that first book, even though it's 2009, I think really holds up. And this is a series that's also like really constantly evolving. I think book 12 or 15 or whatever just came out. So I did want to like shout out one more of those kind of older series that have been around for a long time. Book number 15, Archangel's Resurrection, comes out later this year. So still
nice.
Ongoing.
So there's time for you to catch up.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. Catch up, everybody.
Have we done like the appeal? I guess we've done the appeal, right?
I think so.
Plus everybody's beautiful. You're young. They're young and beautiful. I love the like standing mythology that like it, they either freeze when they're turned and they're never turned after they're beautiful.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And
yeah, that's pretty great.
Or like in many cases, if you're a born vampire, you freeze like at your peak.
Yes.
That's such a romance thing.
Oh, like, yeah. Fine. I'm not mad about it at all. Yeah, and I think look, this vampire is dead. Mm-hmm. And love is going to literally like make them alive again. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, look, there's a lot of like different mythologies in these books, right? But for me, like the Cressley thing about these dummies getting blooded, right? Where they're like, all of a sudden their heart starts beating and they don't know what it is.
Yep.
Put it in my fucking veins. And it's the literal like embodiment of this, right? Of this zero. So I think that's, Jeannie, are you going to talk about Jeannie Frost?
Yeah, let's do that. Oh, because that's another one. So Jeanine Frost has the Night Huntress series, which is, so this is where it sort of crosses. Vampire romance also has this interesting piece. Again, like we talk about the circles, like how things overlap. And often vampire romance crosses into urban fantasy. Mm-hmm. And that is, I think, that's what happens in Alona's books, and that's also what's going on here in Jeanine Frost's books, where the series is just like a larger series. It's multiple books that follow similar characters or the same characters in many cases. So the Night Huntress series is known to Jeanine's friends as Cat and Bones. because those are the two characters. And essentially it begins with, this is one of those series that you got to start at the beginning to understand, to get the whole full effect. Because obviously, just like many other urban fantasy series, like J.D. Nora Roberts.
Yeah.
Still can't believe we had her on last week. Or the other week.
Humble brag. Me neither.
Like J.D. Robb's In Death series,
Yeah.
like the same characters over and over again. So it's best to know them all. But Kat is half vampire, and she is searching for her father, who basically destroyed her mother's life in the first book. And she is captured by a vampire bounty hunter named Bones, and they essentially like they form an alliance she basically exchanges, like she needs help finding her father, and he needs, something that he needs. And so they like team up, and then they're teamed up for the whole series. And it's just really fun.
Yeah.
Right? It's the other piece of this is, we've been talking about this, what feels like is a small but mighty group of romances that are becoming adventure romance.
Yes. Yeah.
In the wake of everything that's gone on.
Yes. Because we're all tired of sitting around in our house. Yes.
Right. But these books feel like adventure romance.
Yeah.
Like primordial adventure romance.
Right. Okay, so one of the things I was a little worried about is, I feel like when we record these, I'm always like, it feels like there's a little pressure to dig real far into the vault, right? Like we want to give people.
Yeah, like I read a bunch of
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? I want you to feel, okay.
Tried new things, tried new voices.
Right? Try something new. And so one of the things I did is I was like, what are the best-selling vampire romances right now? Right? So I went and looked, because there is of course, a micro list on Amazon, right? Like these are the vampire romances. And I ended up starting a book called, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of scroll until I find something that catches my eye in KU. And it was Lord of Population by Elizabeth Stevens. And listen when I tell you, I fell right into this book. Now, again, please check content warnings on this book. It is super intense. But what happens is it starts off, it is essentially like a post-apocalyptic story. 11 or 12 years ago, something has happened and to the earth. And that thing that has happened is essentially kind of environmental decay, of course, but a series, and this reminded me of the superhero thing, a series of the others arrived. Essentially, they're aliens. They arrived like Superman in individual little, shoots, and they arrived on Earth, and they have these crazy superpowers compared to Earthlings and have destroyed Earth society. And the book starts off with this woman, this kind of unnamed woman, and her best friend and this friend's daughter. And they are essentially what's called scavengers, right? And the three of them mostly stay to the woods. There's a whole list of rules that she has to keep herself safe, but her friend convinces her that they should go into a smaller town. And they spend a night in this apartment, and then the next morning they're kind of going to run out of town because you just never know who might get you. And all of a sudden they kind of duck into an abandoned SUV that's open, and a herd of other scavengers run past them. And these three are like, oh shit, if everyone else is running, something really terrible must be coming down the road. And it's essentially a bunch of others, which are the Avengers essentially, but bad guys, land in the middle of town and just beat the shit out of each other and shoot each other and fight and all this stuff, right? And the little girl gets taken, her best friend gets killed. This is all literally in chapter 1. And this woman saves the one other who has been attacked, right? So there's a loner and then the other group. And she saves him, but she steals his sword and this key that he has. And then she figures out that he's essentially a vampire, right? It's not really the vampire we think of, but she sees him, and it's really gross, drinking a human. She describes it like a juice box, and it is. But I will tell you what, I could not stop reading this book. And now it's also 580 pages, so I didn't get all the way through this book. But I was really like the sort of idea of like, despite the, like it really hit the, I don't know, pandemic me was like, yeah, like what is it going to be like when the world ends?
Oh.
So anyway, he tells her name is Cain. And he asks her name, and she has a rule, never tell it, don't interact with strangers. So she tells him her name is Abel. So Cain and Abel essentially go out on a little bit of an adventure. They're going to try and save her friend's daughter, but, it's like essentially ravaged North America.
Okay.
So intense. So, like, he's super into her. He's got that, like, super possessive, like, but it's really, when we say propulsive,
that's what we mean.
This is what we mean. Yeah. So.
I like that. I like the different sort of setup.
Yeah, right. And that's what I was kind of like. And here's the funny part. She's like, why do you call Earth population? And he's like, when we first arrived here, there was like a sign in front of every town that said population and a number. And we thought that's what the name of Earth was. And I immediately was like, I love shit like this. I'm going to keep going.
That's great.
Right?
That's so clever.
It was so, and that's it. It really felt like and again, the violence is super over the top. There's threats on page and memories of sexual violence, right? Like this is no joke,
right.
But it's so raw and it's so, ultimately really like, yeah, she's a survivor and she's like, I'm going to go down fighting. And I love that.
Listen, I love that. I love the idea. Well, like I said, I think anytime you take something like so classic and so ubiquitous as vampires and you twist it around and make it
interesting,
really different and fascinating. I want to read it. This week's episode of Fated Mates is sponsored by Alyxandra Harvey,
author of How to Marry an Earl, the first book in her Cinderella Society series.
This book, which is out tomorrow in ebook and print, features Persephone, who is a classic blue stocking heroine with a penchant for mummification, who jumps at the chance to attend a festival of antiquities to save her oldest friend, Henry, from being framed for treason.
And while she's there, she runs into an old friend, but perhaps new foe, Connell Hunter, the Earl of Northwick.
Listen, I love a hero who went away shy and retiring and came back from whatever dark, traumatic shit that happened to him. Absolute rake.
Yeah.
It's my favorite.
Absolutely. So she's surprised at how irresistible she finds him. Rumor has it he's searching for a wife, but she's starting to suspect that he is really searching for someone who has committed treason.
I love it. So this one is for anyone who loves a friends to lovers story, an enemies to lovers story, a friends to enemies to lovers story. Learn more about How to Marry an Earl at Alyxandra's website, Alyxandra Harvey.com, or as always, check show notes for all the links you need to follow Alyxandra and all of our other sponsors.
Thanks to Alyxandra for sponsoring this week's show.
It makes me think I've talked about this book at least a little bit before. I mean, it just told a different kind of story, especially because it's historical, right? And I feel like there's kind of a big dearth of historical vampires in romance, and that's surprising to me because vampires are historical, right?
Sure.
By virtue of who they are and how long they've lived. So this book is called, I think I've talked about it a little bit before on the podcast, but it's called The Assassin and the Libertine, and it's by it's a debut author, Lily Riley. And the premise of it is that vampirism is a disease, is a virus. But it's not a I'll kill you virus. It's just some people get it. And then once you are a vampire, I believe you can, now I'm sort of the world building is slightly escaping me, but you might be able to have vampire children. Once it's in you, then that's what you are. Anyway, it's set against the court of King Louis, the Sun King in France, and the heroine is like a duchess by day and a vampire assassin. She's joined this like community of this league of vampire assassins, and she is at court. And there is a murder. Her best friend is murdered, and there's like a big question as to who did it. And it's pretty clear, or it seems pretty clear, that a vampire has done it. And but what's fascinating about this book is that there is a lot of like there's basically a class war brewing between the vampires, who are all, of course, because when the virus, it's a lot like plague, right? When the virus came, the rich escaped to the country, and the vampirism like ravaged the poor. And now there is like a vampire emissary Etienne, and he is like essentially the representative of the vampire, leadership, who hangs out at court. And he discovers pretty quickly that she is trying to assassinate, like she is looking for this killer, and then they have to sort of form an alliance again. And an unlikely alliance forms where they kind of agree that they're going to help each other because it would behoove both of them to find the proper killer, right?
Obviously.
And so it's like very the story is, exactly, it goes exactly the way you would think. It's, it's a really like good, solid romance novel. But on top of it, it has this kind of underpinning of this like class conversation.
Right.
Which I think is fascinating. And it's part of why I love True Blood, because I felt like it really just did the business on so many levels. This like, this idea of there being just like culture clash everywhere. And in this case, against the French Revolution, this time period when the French Revolution is brewing too. And I really loved it. And it's historical. So if you're looking for a historical vampire, try The Assassin and the Libertine.
Yeah, the only other historical vampires I can think of is that Regency series by Brooklyn Ann. And one is called The Highwayman's Bite.
Well, there it is. That's a title that tells you everything you need to know if you're a Scott lover.
It sure it is. Perfect, right? Like, what else do you need to know? I think I read maybe that one, and it was years ago, so I don't quite remember. But I do remember thinking at the time that same thing, like, why aren't there more of these? Like, they were around.
Yeah, mashups tend to be really challenging, right? In romance, romance readers like, the romance genre tends to like people to be right over the plate. Yes. Traditionally, at least.
Well, it's funny you say that, though, because I asked some friends for recommendations. So my friend Kate, not Kate Claiborne, is used to have a whole blog about like sort of fantasy and urban fantasy. And and I was kind of like, what do you recommend? Is there anything I haven't read? And she recommended a series by Juliet Cross called the Vampire Blood series. And there's 4 books, and each one of them is a vampire book that is also a fairy tale retelling.
Oh, fun.
Right? Which is so smart. And so the first book, The Black Lily, is a Cinderella retelling. And then it's, there's like The Red Lily, which is obviously the big bad wolf. The White Lily, I think, is, I'm not sure which one that is, probably Beauty and the Beast. And then the Emerald Lily is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. So that is super fun. So if you're looking for another thing that might like bridge the gap, and I think that is another way to keep these things like sort of interesting, right? So those might be something you'll check out too. The Vampire Blood series by Juliet Cross.
I am excited about that. I feel like I read the first one of those and then I never got back to them just because.
Well, maybe they didn't, right? You read the first one and then forget the rest of them.
When these
are 2017 and 2018, so not too long ago.
Right. So while we're on like genre mashup, I feel like we have to talk about Carolyn Sparks.
Yes.
Carolyn Sparks wrote the Love at Stake series, which is 16 books long. The first is called How to Marry a Millionaire Vampire. And this setup is all you need to know about what the mashup is because, yes.
I feel like we've talked about this one, but keep going.
Right, I'm gonna be fast.
Do it anyway.
Because the setup is the heroine is a dentist,
Yes.
and the hero the hero is like a vampire king who is like has created this like is creating like a synthetic doll. Essentially, he owns a company, and the company is creating these synthetic dolls, not for sex, but for feeding. So like they figured out how to make synthetic blood.
Sure.
But they want to give like vampires the like feeling of the kill, which I think is hilarious. And so his name is Roman, and they've brought his like scientists at the very beginning of the book. His scientists bring him like what they think is like we knocked it out of the park here. We cracked the code. We got a doll that you can really like sink your teeth into, so to speak.
Yeah.
And he does, and it rips one of his fangs out of his mouth. And the lore, the world building of this particular series is that if a vampire goes a full night without one of his fangs, it's gone forever. So he has to find, it's like 1:00 in the morning, and he has to find a dentist that is open and can fix his fang.
Sure.
And so it's New Orleans, thankfully, I think. And so he finds an all-night dentist, and that is our heroine. And so, like, these books are hilariously funny. They are great rom-coms for those of you who really are looking for a romance that has a com in it. And also they have these, like, big, brawny vampires who, get what they deserve, I think.
Obviously. Okay, let me shout out to Molly Harper. And so if you are specifically, when I first started listening to audiobooks, I remember asking Kelly, like, what would you recommend? And she was like, okay, if she knew I was like, she's like, Molly Harper writes, I mean, they're like very romance light in the sense, I think they're all like closed door, maybe. I mean, it's the really leaning hard into the calm, but Molly Harper has a long time partnership with an audiobook narrator named Amanda Ronconi. And they are just devastatingly good together. Like, she just really is great. And so, Kate, my friend, and, between Kate and Kelly, recommend Driving Mr. Dead. And in this book, so I really recommend it on audio, although it's, 10 years old and pretty cheap on Kindle, a couple bucks. Miranda Puckett is our heroine, and she essentially gets dumped by her, like, kind of perfect boyfriend. And so she decides to settle down on a job that gets her out of town, which is long distance vampire transportation. Because, of course, they're champion the light or whatever. Perfect. And so her first assignment is to drive a vampire named Colin Sutherland from Washington to like a sleepy little town. And, it describes him as persnickety and stuffy and devastatingly handsome. And of course, you've got a road trip romance. So a million things can go wrong, and of course do. So if you've never read or like listened to a Molly Harper book with Amanda Ronconi as the narrator, you are in for a real treat. They are a delight. And I think they are like, it's the comedy part is terrific in her books. They're always really fun and really funny. Okay, I have one more tiny little funny one. It is not even a short story as much as it is. I think it's actually called, I didn't look. I mean, it's literally 15 pages. I really like Shira Glassman. She has written some of my favorites. There's one called Cinnamon Blade, which is oh my God, it's really delightful. It's a superhero who falls in love with the woman she keeps saving. So these two women fall in love with each other. It's great. But she also wrote this tiny little vampire story. It's maybe 15 pages long, called A Man of Taste. And in this book, a woman named Nellie is a vampire, and she doesn't want to be a vampire. She's like, just feels like she shouldn't be killing anybody. So she only essentially like feeds off people who have just died, or she tries to kill people who are bad, right? Like she kills like bad guys, but they taste terrible. right? If you're a killer, like, right?
I love that.
So she then sort of, there's this moment where she like figures out like, okay, an innocent man is about to be killed on the gallows or whatever. And so she's like, well, I'll just like, feed off of him the second he dies. And he tastes delicious because he's a good person. So anyway, she has her eye on this other fellow named Jacob, and he is killed for like doing the right thing. And she's feeding off of him, but then he kind of wakes up and she realized that he's like a special kind of ghost. It sounds like that maybe happens in Judaism. I'm not entirely sure of all the details, but so like this little vampire and ghost fall in love together and have hot sex while she's feeding off of him. It was great. And like I said, very satisfying 15 pages. One, boom.
I love it.
But again, I was really like, this is like a cool like angle, right? Like it just felt so different. And so I liked it a lot.
Listen, while we're talking about vampires and ghosts, it is always important for us to plug Conrad and Naomi. For those of you who did not read Immortals After Dark, because you said to us and other people, it's too many books. I can't do 18 books. It's so much. Oh, my God. Please, please understand that you can just read Dark Desires. No, you can read Dark Needs at Night's Edge, starring Naomi the Ghost and Conrad the Vampire, my soft, sweet baby. And it is absolutely perfect. Yeah. And you never have to read another Cressley book. You never have to read that one. Just read that one perfect morsel of a vampire ghost story and then come back to us and tell us we were right.
I think that's why I was so won over by this A Man of Taste. I'm going to get it. It's like Conrad and Naomi. And I was like, and look, 15 pages. You can read it while you're waiting for the car to get washed and get the whole story. Boom.
Yes. Perfect.
It was cute.
Imagine being able to tell a story in 15 pages.
Listen,
you're not going to spend that woman.
You're not going to be able to spend a better 99 cents. It is so nice. It's perfect.
I'm so impressed.
There's even sex on page. It's like, bam, everything you would want. It's so cute.
I love it.
Yeah, I think Shira Glassman is really a master of like the short form romance. And I was like, wow, this is impressive. Well, Sarah, I don't know. Do you think we did the business?
I think we did some of the business. I feel like some real deal vampire readers are probably going to be like, you guys are amateurs.
You know what, though? I think that's fine. And we would love to obviously hear. Yeah, we would love to hear what you're reading and what you love. But I think that, I feel like that's okay too, right? Like we're here to just
I like
try
being
our
an
best.
amateur. I like feeling like an amateur. I want you to tell us what the best vampire romances are. Lay them down in comments on Twitter, on Instagram.
Yeah.
If there's an interstitial you want, hit me up on Instagram. I'm going to run a poll. Everyone's going to say they want it. It's there. You're just going to get it. So
sure. I love it.
We love you guys. I think a lot about how I wish that we spent more time with you in person. Someday.
We're thinking about some cool
I know
things.
we have a couple things cooking. So, save your pennies for trips sometime soon. And
it's going to be amazing.
Other than that, please support our sponsors. You may have noticed that we are running ads now on Fated Mates. And you can help by supporting our sponsors if we talk about a item or a product or a book that sounds great.
Yeah, it does.
And you can find information on all of our sponsors, as always, in show notes. And that's that. Don't get bitten by a vampire this week. Or if you do, tell us all about it.
I was like, or if you do, make sure that, it's lovelorn and weary with the world and you're there to save them.
Make sure they're super hot. They will be, though. That's the rule.
Maybe you're the hot one, everybody. Maybe you're the hot one.
Do you remember, you're not a TV watcher, but a long time ago. I mean,
it was a long time ago.
15 to 17 years ago, there was a TV show with that hot guy from Game of Thrones. And it was called New Amsterdam. Not this new one. This new Amsterdam is about a hospital. This was an old one, and it was about a guy who it was played by Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who was made famous by Game of Thrones. But he played a vampire detective. Who had
amazing.
it was like a procedural. Like every week, it was like the crime of the week. And he had lived for, 300 years or something in New York City, and was full of ennui. And there was one perfect season of that show, and then it got canceled, probably because it wasn't very good. But let's be honest, maybe because it was excellent.
It's probably on Netflix. Yeah.
And if you can watch it, I highly recommend it. But it ends in that same way that lovely show Pitch ends, where you feel like, oh, these two are going to end up together. And then like there's no payoff because they got canceled.
Listen, this is why I don't watch TV, everybody.
I know. It's the worst kind of cliffhanger.
Yeah, it's terrible. Well,
oh, you know who else writes a great vampire romance? Is Alyxandra Ivy.
Oh, yeah.
If you read anything by her, she's great. Mm-hmm. You guys, I can't remember which book I love the most of hers, but I will put it in show notes.
You'll see it in the photo array. Yeah. I think there's plenty there for you to read. And like I said, if you're looking to just see what's out there and what's new, just click on best vampire like what's popular on Amazon right now. And I was like, oh, wow, look at all these vampire romances.
Yeah,
I've never heard of before.
Because there's also from friends of the pod, there's a recent Tessa Bailey series with vampires in it.
That's right. I really liked the first one of that series a lot, actually.
Begins with an R. The Resurrection,
Reborn,
the Reckoning, the
Reborn Yesterday, maybe?
Born Yesterday, yes. And then there's the Katie Roberts.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
MMFFFMM. Lots of bits happening in there. And that's the first one's, I think, called Sacrifice. Now I'm doing this off the top of my head without any research.
Fine.
I'm flying without a net.
That's okay. That's how we are.
We'll put all that in the photo array, too. But, yeah.
God, could you imagine if you're a vampire, like how many books you'd have in your brain?
Oh my God.
Hundreds of years worth of
reading. We need to get a vampire on this podcast to help us. If you're a vampire and you want to come on the podcast.
My TBR is so huge. I am still reading category romances from 1983.
Oh my God, Jen, do you remember when we were doing the first season of the podcast, we got that email from the guy who was a vampire?
I don't want to talk about it. It's too much. That's when I really knew we'd stumbled into something weird and big. I was like, oh. Okay, then.
Look, he was very friendly. He wanted us to call him. We didn't call him, you guys.
We didn't.
He's probably mad we ghosted him. Is it ghosting if you don't call them back? Call them at all? Anyway, well, sir, sorry. Unless you could talk about romance novels, we don't have space for you.
All right, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.